Blake, and although most of the demonstrations have been peaceful, some have devolved into mayhem with looting, vandalism, and the shooting deaths of two protesters. From Kenosha to Minneapolis to Portland, Oregon, law enforcement has been responding to these sometimes angry crowds with what's called less lethal force. Lee Cowan reports.
The demonstrations in Kenosha, Wisconsin streets in the name of Jacob Blake started, as most protests do, peacefully. But as day turned to night, simmering tensions boiled over. Tempers were lost, and so was the message. For police, balancing the right to assemble with public safety is a delicate one.
Dude, they're just brutal
crowds get out of control.
pigs.
The weapons at their disposal are designed to be less lethal.
But they've killed people.
But in the weeks of unrest since the death of George Floyd, it's not just violent agitators being targeted by beanbag rounds and foam-tipped projectiles. It's the innocent who are being injured as well. Take this protest in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, back in May. 34-year-old Latoya Ratliff was there. Was it peaceful?
It was very peaceful. There weren't any issues for the most part of the day.
But something changed. She wasn't sure just what at the time, but clearly the mood had shifted.
We were kneeling on the ground, a good distance away from the officers. And even as we were kneeling and chanting and being peaceful, at that time we started to get tear gassed.
The crowd dispersed, including Latoya. That's her wearing a pink backpack. But watch what happens next.
What is that for?
Latoya was shot in the head by a 40-millimeter foam-tipped round, fired, her attorney says, by a Fort Lauderdale police officer. The impact fractured Latoya's skull. She needed 20 stitches.
And I remember people screaming and saying, help, she's been hit, call 911. In my mind, I'm not thinking that I was shot, because why would the officer shoot me if I'm not posing any type of threat to him and I'm actually leaving?
It happened hundreds of times.
Not a unique or isolated incident.
No, it happened every single night at every single protest.
Big of a deal it was until there was like surgeons around me.
Linda Tirado is a freelance journalist sent to cover the George Floyd protests in Minneapolis. She's a veteran of this kind of reporting. She was in Ferguson, Missouri back in 2014 after another police killing. This one of Michael Brown.
There's a space where the protesters are gathered in a group and police are gathered in their line, and the people who are in between in that space are going to be media. And that's how you get that understanding of what's going on, is you stand and you watch both sides.
That's what she was doing in Minneapolis that night. This is the last photo she took, what appears to show an officer aiming directly at her.
I think that not shooting people in the face for exercising the first thing we fixed about the Constitution should just be standard operating procedure.
The non-lethal round shot at Linda that night blinded her in her left eye.
So I can see to about here. And everything from here to here is just a blank. I'm assured that as I become used to having one eye, I'll be able to do all the things I used to do without it being a problem. But like the getting used to only having one eye is not a small task.
To be sure, police have been injured in the protests too. Hundreds of them. More than 50 on one particularly violent night in Seattle recently. Crowds can be dangerous. Dispersing them is often necessary. But the research on the lethality of less lethal weapons is pretty hard to come by. In 2017, a review of the available literature on the subject was published in the medical journal BMJ Open. Of the nearly 2,000 people since 1990 documented to have been injured by less lethal rounds, 300 suffered permanent disability.